Sometimes you find a grammar that surprises you, and this grammar by Clayton Croy, a primer in Biblical Greek, did actually surprise me. Let's find out why. Today we're looking at a primer in Biblical Greek by Clayton Croy. Now this grammar has been around for a little while. It was released in 1999, which makes it one of the older grammars that's probably still in use today. A number of you have either asked me to review this grammar or have been raised with it or swear by it, so it's interesting to take a look at it and to compare it to a lot of the other grammars that are out there today. This grammar is broken into 32 lessons, and within each lesson you have a sequentially ordered number of sections. Now this follows the same kind of pattern that David Allen Black followed in his grammar from 2009. The other thing about this grammar is it only has about 200 pages. Now that makes this one of the shorter grammars that are available today. To compare this, Summers, the Essentials of Biblical Greek I think it's called, Summers grammar is, that's about 156 pages, so that is the smallest and cheapest grammar on the market today. And you can find out more about that if you're interested. If the smallest and cheapest grammar on the market is going to be any good, you can find that out in the card up here. Another comparison, beginning with New Testament Greek by Drs. Merkel and Plummer, which is a fairly recent grammar, which I think strikes a really good balance of detail with the things that you need to know, right? So one of the challenges, we'll talk about this later on, but one of the challenges with grammar is how much information needs to go into them. And so that grammar weighs in at nearly 300 pages, 278 pages plus appendices and so on. Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek is over 400 pages. Dana Harris's new grammar is 475 pages. And Rodney Decker's Reading Koine Greek is well over 500 pages, 560-ish pages, I believe it is. So this is much shorter as a grammar than a lot of the other grammars on the market today. Now this means that this makes it quite a good grammar for an entry-level grammar if you've never learnt Greek before, in one respect. We will come back to why it kind of isn't so good in another respect, but it is quite a simple grammar, which is probably one of the reasons why a lot of Greek professors quite like it. Now it also includes exercises, and we're going to talk about those exercises in just a moment because they are both a strength, and at the same time there's one thing about them that may hamper you in getting it. But nonetheless, in terms of the reason why this grammar was written, in the introductory section, Clayton Croy gives us an explanation. He argues that most of the grammars that are in print are faulty or flawed in some particular way. And he lists a number of ways about how they are faulty or flawed, including things like wrong information, or excessive detail, or not very many exercises, or some pedagogical thing. And so he's got a list here of reasons why he felt there was room for another grammar today. And you can kind of understand this because it's really hard to find the perfect grammar. And that's one of the things that I've been saying as I've been reviewing grammars on this channel, is that it's really hard to find a grammar that is actually perfect, that does have all the details that, you know, but without overwhelming you with details, that does have good number of exercises, you know, so this is kind of one of those challenging things. And so he's dead right in this. Some of these grammars that are out there today do have some of these funny things. And it's not uncommon for grammars to not have enough exercises. And often one of the reasons they don't have exercises is because they have a workbook. And if they have a workbook, then you have to pay extra for the workbook, and that bumps the price up. And all of these things are things that actually does make it rather difficult to, you know, create the ideal grammar. Other grammars, on the other hand, have too much detail in them. And this is one of the critiques of, say, Mounce and Decker. They both get that critique for having too much information in them. Though I think there's a place for grammars like this. And other grammars, they don't have enough exercises, and this is one area where I think Mounce's grammar and perhaps Harris's could be critiqued. Mounce's workbook has exercises, so does Harris's, but then Harris's, even in the workbook, doesn't have enough translation exercises. And this is where I think he's really majored. Because one of the things we find in this grammar is that the number of exercises he has reflects how many exercises he thinks we should have, which is way more, really, than any other grammar on the market today. But we're going to come back to that in just a moment. Another thing he's concerned about is the price, which, as I mentioned before, if you get Mounce and say the workbook, the price goes up dramatically, or the price of the grammar itself is kind of expensive, such as with Dana Harris's new grammar, which is well over $40, over $45, I think it is. So it's kind of expensive to buy these grammars So again, he's wanted to create a low-priced grammar. So when Croy was looking at the market and trying to figure out, which grammar to use, he came to this conclusion that none of the grammars that are out there are perfect, and so he went about trying to create the perfect grammar. Really interesting, right? So let's get into the strengths and the weaknesses of this grammar. But before we do, let me just take a moment to ask you, if you're finding these videos helpful, go ahead and like this video. That helps the YouTube algorithm so that other people know this is a helpful video. And also hit the subscribe button and the notify bell. That way you'll be notified when new videos are released. Let's get into the strengths of this grammar. There are a number of great strengths in this grammar. One of them is the pedagogical approach. That is, the way that Clayton Croy has approached the language and teaching the language in this grammar. And this comes out in a number of ways. One of those is the way he lays out the chapters themselves. So by the time that you get to chapter 8, just 8 chapters in, you've got verbs, nouns, prepositions, adjectives, the different declensions, the article, all of that has been sorted out. And that means that you're able to include a wider variety of exercises because you're not trying to exclude verses or passages that have prepositions or adjectives or whatever it happens to be. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of the exercises. In addition to that, the pedagogical approach comes out in his explanations. For instance, his explanation of syllabification, that is how Greek words break into syllables, is probably one of the best that I've seen in any grammar anywhere. It's simple, but yet enough so that you can get it really quickly. This is really quite good. And like most grammars, he starts with verbs. In fact, chapter 2, you're into verbs right away, just like we found with Harris's grammar as well. Now, again, this is a little different to some of the other grammars. For instance, beginning with New Testament Greek, starts with nouns, first and second declension nouns, then goes on to the verbs. Mount starts with pretty much everything else and then goes on to verbs. And so this is a great way of sort of getting you into the verb structure really quickly, but then you fill out all the other elements. Another thing he's done, which I haven't seen done before, is that he teaches the present tense verb, and then in addition to the indicative of the present tense, he will teach the infinitive as well. And so whenever he goes through, he's not only teaching the indicative, he's also teaching the infinitive, which means there's no later chapter on the infinitive. So this is kind of an interesting approach as well. And that means, again, that when he gets into his exercises, he's able to use complementary infinitives in there right from chapter 2, which is pretty amazing. The other major strength of this grammar, in my opinion, is the exercises. He starts off with 19 exercises in chapter 2, but by the time you're at the end of the book, in fact, by the time you're at chapter 10, you've got over 30 exercises. And what's more, these exercises are drawn from a variety of sources. In fact, he has 3 sources. One, he has a group of verses and passages that he's made up. So while I don't normally like to have made up exercises, it's actually not so bad in this grammar. And the main reason is because it's so easy to exclude them if you want to. But he's also very clearly put in quite a lot of thought. Now, that's not to say that other people who have created their own have not. But I think here the strength is that there's only ever going to be about 9 at the most, well, 9 to 11 made up exercises, and then he goes to texts. And when he goes to the text, he's got 2 key texts. One is the Septuagint, and the other one is the New Testament. And when he goes to the Septuagint, again, you've got just as many exercises, for the most part, from the Septuagint as you have from the New Testament, as you have from made up. Which means that if you've got, say, 11 made-up exercises, you're also going to have normally 12 from the Septuagint and maybe another 12 from the New Testament as well, which means that you're getting into a variety of texts really right from the beginning. And the other thing I really like about this is it gets you reading the Septuagint. He even has an introduction to the Septuagint that's going to tell you that there's going to be some differences between what you read here and what you might read in your English Bible or in your Hebrew. So it's kind of a helpful approach. And I love the fact that he's drawing on the Septuagint so strongly in this grammar. This is a huge strength, along with the fact that you're going to have, by chapter 10, 35-ish exercises to translate. Now, that's not all. You also get a few English sentences that you have to translate into Greek, which allows you to exercise some of that active capability with the language. So there's a good number of exercises in this, and I think this again is one of the major strengths of this grammar. Now, it's not all a bed of roses. This grammar does have a number of weaknesses, although they're not that great. Some of these are just quirks. For instance, he treats first and second declension nouns in chapters 3 and 4, and he doesn't talk about the article. He has a separate chapter on the article. That's just a quirk. That's unusual. Another quirk he has in this grammar is he has a hang-up about inclusive language. I mean, one of the shortfalls he sees in other grammars is that they don't use inclusive language, which means that in this grammar, when he comes to correct that, I feel, at least, that it's kind of a little bit forced at times. So where a lot of grammars would have, the man went to the market, or the good man for adjectives for whatever, he's not going to do that. He's going to use some other thing, and it could be the good brother or the good sister, and he's going to use sister a lot. Rather than brother or men. And it just seems odd, mostly in my opinion, because it's just not the way we see the New Testament represented. And he says that this is his, I don't know, maybe I'm being harsh here. Let me just conclude this and just say, I think this is just a little bit forced and it feels odd. So I would count that as a quirk, and it's not a real weakness, it's just quirky. Another weakness of this grammar is that even though it's got all of these awesome exercises, it has no answer key. And that reflects the fact that this grammar is designed for the classroom, not for self-study. If you're a grammar teacher, this is great. If you're looking for some additional exercises to add to, say, Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, or some other grammar like beginning with New Testament Greek, where you do get an answer key and you just want some extra practice, again, this grammar is going to be good because it's going to provide you with the opportunity to find some extra exercises, but it's going to leave you to try and work out the answers on your own. So as a classroom grammar, it's not a big deal. As a self-study grammar, this is a problem. A couple of other things about this is that it's a little bit light on vocabulary. It doesn't say how many words he's going to get you to learn, but I think it looks to me to be about the words that occur 50 times or more, which is okay, but it would be better because you're only learning 12 to 15 words per chapter. Why not make that, especially as you get on later on in the grammar, why not make that 20 or 30, maybe even 40 words, maybe not 40, but 30 words would be fine. And I think you'd get a lot more words into the student at the same time. Now, maybe you can argue there's plenty of grammar to learn and therefore adding too much vocabulary becomes a burden, but I just prefer to see a little bit extra vocabulary here. And also, the layout of this grammar. Now, I've been looking at the Logos edition. I don't have a physical copy of this. The Logos edition, and I would suggest the physical edition is probably much the same, doesn't have a lot of charts. It doesn't have a lot of guidance around paradigm memorization. And so if you're a student and you're working through this again on your own, this is going to become a real issue because you're just not going to know what to learn, what to memorize, or even how to do that. So I think, again, this is one of those things that's going to hold you back from using this as a self-study grammar. A couple other things, I feel like I'm picking this apart. It doesn't have any explanations of English grammar, so if you don't know how language works, that's going to be a problem. The other thing about this grammar that I think is a bit of a weakness is just the time in which it was produced. It was written in 1999, well, it was published in 1999, which means that it's going to have deponency. It teaches deponency. It doesn't have really any discussion of the middle voice that we would recognize today. It also doesn't really deal with the perfect tense very well. He's got a traditional approach to the perfect because, again, I think a lot of the current discussion around the perfect tense was not really there then. So it doesn't deal with aspect. So all of these things are really under that category of it's a product of its time. So it's a little bit dated now and doesn't have these components in them, all these discussion points in them. Now that may not be a problem, again, in the classroom, because a professor in the classroom can teach differently and get around those things. But if you're self-studying, again, that's going to be a bit of an issue. Particularly, I think, the middle voice, which isn't really addressed at all. So what was it that surprised me about this grammar? Well, there was the two things. First of all, I was really surprised at just how well written this grammar is. In one sense, I shouldn't be saying that I'm surprised about how well it's written, because every grammar that I review on this channel is well written by somebody who knows the language well and who teaches it well. But this one, the way it sort of, just some of the ways it has these nice, clear descriptions and explanations, I found it really helpful, and I just thought that was really good. And the other surprise, of course, was just the exercises. 35 exercises per chapter. That's insane. Great work. That is a great surprise. So in summary, this grammar, in my opinion, is an excellent classroom grammar. And if you're using this, even though it's dated in places today, if you're using this in the classroom, then I would not critique you for it. You want to probably update some of the discussion, but for the most part, I can understand why you would want to use this in the classroom. It's not much good if you want to study on your own to learn Greek, but it might be okay if you're just wanting to refresh your Greek. Secondly, I would also say this is probably one of those grammars that's going to be okay as a reference grammar. It doesn't have as much information in it as I would normally recommend for a reference grammar, but it does have good explanation. I would probably rate this a little lower on my reference grammar list than a lot of the other grammars that I've reviewed, but nonetheless, because of the clarity of the descriptions, I think that would be helpful for some students. Particularly if you're coming at it from a longer grammar, a bigger grammar, and you just want something more short and succinct. This would be a great grammar to complement it. So what do you think? Have you been through this grammar? If so, leave a message in the comment section below and let me know what you thought of it. I'd be interested to hear your feedback. And if you're interested in learning Biblical Greek, I start new beginning Greek courses fairly regularly inside Master New Testament Greek inside our membership. And if you're interested in joining me, go download my Roadmap to Mastery, mntg.me/roadmap, so that you can find out what that process looks like and what it will, how long it will take for you to get from point A to point B. So, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate each one of you, and thank you for your messages and your comments. I always enjoy reading them. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery. We'll see you then.